The night was heavy with fumes, and the air in the cluttered shed stung with poison. The once vibrant parrot, named Rio, perched weakly on a rusted cage bar, feathers dulled and wings trembling. A single lamp flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow his hope. Thomas, the cruel owner, muttered as he shuffled past, ignoring Rio's rasping coughs. "Noisy thing," Thomas said with disdain, his voice echoing against the stained walls. Rio's eyes darted desperately toward a crack in the window, where the moonlight struggled through, as if freedom whispered just beyond reach. His chest heaved, every breath a battle, yet his gaze remained fierce, unbroken by the suffocating haze. The shed was silent, except for his faint cries that seemed too small for such pain. The world outside continued unaware, but inside a quiet fight for life raged on. Rio clung to the cage bar with trembling claws, his breath sharp against the thick air. Thomas sat nearby, sipping from a bottle, uncaring of the creature suffocating before him. "Be quiet," Thomas said coldly, his voice slicing the silence. Rio's wings sagged, every attempt to lift them ending in failure, yet his spirit burned through the dim light. The cracked window above seemed like a cruel taunt, freedom visible but unreachable. His cries softened to whispers, but the echo of his pain filled the shed. Shadows danced across the walls, painting the image of captivity. The world felt smaller with every passing second, yet Rio's gaze still searched for a way out. His story was only beginning, even if hope was fading fast. The shed door creaked open, and faint light spilled across the floor, but no help came. A passerby paused at the threshold, glanced once, and turned away without care. Rio croaked weakly, his voice breaking in the toxic air. Thomas grumbled, "Mind your business," pushing the door shut. Darkness returned, thicker than before, and Rio's body sagged with exhaustion. The faint hope stirred by the light died quickly, swallowed by shadows. His wings drooped lower, his claws tightened around the cage wire. Each sound outside felt like salvation slipping away, leaving him in silence. The cruelty of being ignored cut deeper than any cage. Alone again, he stared at the crack in the window, unwilling to surrender. His eyes still searched for escape, even when the world turned its back. Rio gathered his last strength, flapping his wings against the bars. Feathers scattered into the air, catching the dim glow of the lamp as they fell. Thomas laughed bitterly, pointless bird, his tone dripping with contempt. The cage rattled but did not yield, its rusted iron holding fast. Rio's chest heaved in defeat, his cries dissolving into coughs that echoed against the walls. The toxic air thickened, wrapping him like chains. His body trembled, but his spirit clawed at the silence. The struggle was not just for air but for survival itself. He tilted his head toward the crack of light above, eyes fierce despite weakness. His story was still alive in that stare, and it burned against the darkness. The shed fell into eerie silence as Rio collapsed against the bars, his small body shaking from exhaustion. The flickering lamp above hummed faintly, casting warped shadows on the walls. Thomas muttered, "Pathetic thing," taking another drink, never once glancing at the cage. Outside, the night carried on with indifferent whispers of wind and distant barking dogs. Rio's breathing slowed, shallow and labored, but his eyes refused to close. A scar across his wing caught the dim light, a mark of battles endured and survived. His fight was not finished, even if his body begged to rest. The shed held him prisoner, but his spirit searched for freedom. Silence carried the weight of his suffering, yet beneath it all, defiance glimmered like a fragile ember refusing to die. Morning light seeped faintly through the cracks, softening the edges of the poisonous gloom. Rio stirred, feathers brittle, but his eyes burned with memory. Once he had soared above green fields, wings gliding with freedom, heart unbroken by cruelty. He remembered the wind, crisp and clean, filling his chest with strength. The shed now mocked that past, turning beauty into pain. His scar pulsed like a reminder of what was taken, Yet within his gaze, a spark refused to die. Thomas snored nearby, slouched in a chair, oblivious to the fragile life enduring inches away. Rio tilted his head, weak but unyielding, his silent plea echoing in the dim air. Somewhere beyond those walls, hope waited. He clung to the memory of sky, refusing to let the darkness claim him. The shed creaked as the morning breeze slipped through broken panels, carrying a faint scent of grass from outside. Rio inhaled shakily, savoring even that trace of life. His eyes softened, glistening with unspoken longing. "You don't belong in here," he seemed to whisper to himself, his voice silent yet loud in spirit. The memory of his kindred flock drifted into his mind, their calls carried on bright winds. He pressed closer to the bars, his chest straining against pain, desperate to feel a piece of that world again. Thomas shifted, grumbling in his sleep, a bottle tipping onto the floor. Rio froze, body tense, knowing cruelty always lurked when Thomas stirred. The breeze faded, leaving stale fumes behind, but the glimpse of freedom lingered in his heart like a promise. Rio's mind wandered to a time when his wings cut through clouds, when each beat carried him higher into endless skies. The shed's cage mocked that memory, rusted iron against fragile feathers. He whispered in thought, "I was free once." His body trembled, but his spirit clung to the memory of flight. Feathers shifted weakly as if his body remembered, even when strength was gone. A shaft of sun lit his scar, the mark of betrayal, but also of survival. He stretched one wing slightly, shaking, a silent vow in motion. Thomas muttered in his sleep, muting the world's beauty with his indifference. Yet Rio's eyes glowed brighter, carrying hope that no cage could silence. He would not forget who he was, even if this darkness tried to erase him. The silence pressed in, broken only by Rio's faint breaths and Thomas's snores. A moth fluttered near the lamp, its fragile wings tapping softly against metal. Rio's eyes followed the moth, captivated by its fragile dance, a tiny echo of freedom. He tilted his head, feathers quivering with longing. "Fly for me," his heart seemed to say, aching to join. But his wings drooped heavy, refusing to answer. The shed's walls closed tighter with every second, but that flutter reminded him of the outside world. He was not alone in desiring escape, even a moth fought for the light. His gaze locked on it, drawing strength from the fragile defiance of its flight. For Rio, hope was no longer just memory, it became something alive in the present. The morning deepened, golden light stretching across the shed floor, highlighting stains and scars of neglect. Rio shifted closer to the cage bars, pressing his beak against cold metal, his breath fogging faintly. He closed his eyes, imagining the sky waiting beyond. "Not yet," his spirit declared, though his body sagged. Thomas stirred awake, muttering curses, rubbing his face with tired hands. He kicked a bottle aside, its clatter sharp against the silence. Rio tensed, feathers bristling, heart pounding with dread. Yet even in that fear, his gaze lifted toward the window's crack, light stronger now, as though promising he was not forgotten. His cries softened into steady silence, but his eyes remained steady with determination. The fight within him would not bend to cruelty. The day dragged on with choking fumes, filling every corner of the shed. Thomas paced angrily, muttering curses, his boots thudding like thunder. He slammed his fist against the cage, startling Rio. "You're nothing but noise," Thomas barked, his voice bitter. Rio recoiled, feathers ruffled in terror, his chest heaving with shallow breaths. The cruelty in Thomas's eyes burned like fire, a reminder of the chains binding Rio's fragile spirit. Yet, behind the fear, Rio's gaze did not collapse. It hardened. His eyes glowed with a quiet defiance, as though he vowed to endure. The rusted cage shivered under the impact, and feathers floated through the air like fragments of sorrow. Rio clung to his memory of the sky, his silence now sharper than cries. His fight was only beginning. Smoke from a tipped bottle mixed with toxic fumes, spreading thicker through the shed. Rio coughed, wings twitching in agony, his claws slipping on metal bars. "Quiet down, bird," Thomas snapped, lighting a cigarette, the flame casting cruel shadows. The burning scent worsened, the choking haze, suffocating the fragile life inside. Rio staggered, feathers damp with sweat like mist, yet his eyes stayed locked on the faint sunlight above. Even as cruelty consumed the air, hope shimmered in that thin crack of light. He would not let despair claim him, even if breath failed. His body shook, but his spirit lifted, whispering a promise unseen. The shed became a battlefield of survival, his silence a declaration louder than any cry. A faint rustle came from the shadows. Another pair of eyes watched through a crack in the boards. A smaller creature crept closer, fragile and frightened. A stray kitten, matted fur clinging to its thin frame, slipped inside. Rio noticed his head tilting, heart aching at the sight. The kitten mewed softly, its cry nearly swallowed by the stench. Thomas remained unaware, pacing in anger, bottle in hand. Rio spread his wings slightly, a protective instinct flaring even through weakness. He whispered in spirit, "You are not alone." The kitten crouched near the cage, trembling but drawn to him. In that shared pain, a fragile bond was born. Rio's eyes softened, the weight of hope now doubled by companionship. The kitten edged closer, eyes wide with fear yet glimmering with trust. Rio's chest tightened as he leaned toward her, his feathers trembling but his spirit strong. He shifted so his wings shielded her from Thomas's looming shadow. "Stay near me," his presence seemed to say, silent yet fierce. Thomas turned sharply, suspicious of noise, his gaze scanning the floor. Rio froze, claws gripping tight, shielding Luna with his body. The kitten pressed close to the cage, trembling but refusing to flee. In that moment, strength bloomed in Rio's defiance, his loyalty stronger than fear. Cruelty would not crush him if it meant protecting another life. He found purpose in the fragile heartbeat beside him, and the shed became less of a prison, more of a battleground for hope. Thomas's rage boiled as he noticed movement near the cage. "Vermin," he growled, swinging a boot toward the kitten. Luna darted back, squealing, her body trembling in terror. Rio thrashed against the bars, his wings slamming with furious strength. The cage rattled like thunder, feathers flying in the haze. Thomas cursed, his boot missing as Luna hid in the corner shaking. Rio cried out, a raw, defiant screech that echoed through the shed, piercing the thick air. His body weakened with the effort, but his spirit towered in that sound. He refused to surrender, not to pain, not to cruelty. The shed walls held him captive, but his heart broke through, roaring louder than chains. In that moment, Rio became more than a prisoner. He became a protector. The shed door burst open with a harsh crack, flooding the room with sudden daylight. Thomas cursed, shielding his eyes, as a figure stepped inside. Oliver, a kind-faced rescuer, froze at the sight, Rio gasping for air, Luna cowering in fear. His chest tightened, anger burning behind his eyes. "What have you done?" Oliver demanded, voice sharp but trembling with outrage. Thomas sneered, waving a hand dismissively. "Just filthy animals," he replied coldly. Rio's gaze flicked to Oliver, feathers bristling in alarm. He feared another cruel hand, another betrayal waiting to strike. Yet in Oliver's eyes there was no malice, only fierce compassion. For the first time hope felt close enough to touch. Rio hesitated, but his spirit stirred, sensing change. Rio shrank back, wings pressed tight against the bars, eyes flashing with mistrust. He had seen too many hands raised in cruelty to believe in kindness easily. Oliver stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Easy, friend," he whispered softly, kneeling near the cage. His movements were slow, deliberate, showing no threat. Thomas snorted with contempt, leaning back against the wall. "Hell bite you," Thomas said with a mocking laugh. Rio's chest rose and fell rapidly, torn between fear and curiosity. He eyed Oliver's hand, open and gentle, a stark contrast to Thomas's fists. His heart pounded, the memory of betrayal still heavy. Yet something in Oliver's gaze cut through the haze. It was not ownership, it was respect. Oliver's voice softened as he leaned closer. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, words trembling with sincerity. Rio cocked his head, watching carefully, eyes narrowing with suspicion. The faint sunlight glowed across his feathers, bringing out the scars that told his story. Oliver's hand remained steady, palm open, waiting, not forcing. Luna crept closer to the bars, brushing against Rio's wing, as if urging him to trust. Thomas muttered bitterly, "Fool, wasting his time." Oliver ignored him, gaze never leaving Rio's. For a breath the shed fell silent, broken only by the fragile sound of hope stirring. Rio leaned forward slightly, torn between fear and the warmth calling him closer. The moment felt fragile, like a glass thread ready to break. Rio's eyes darted toward another cage in the shed, where a frail puppy whimpered faintly. Its body was thin, fur patchy, eyes large with fear. Oliver turned, face hardening at the sight. "How many have you broken?" he demanded, voice sharp with anger. Thomas shrugged, his indifference chilling. "They're nothing but pests," he sneered. Rio looked back at the puppy, a spark of recognition stirring within him. He understood the silent cry for help, for he had lived it. His feathers puffed slightly, his body trembling as his heart swelled with shared pain. Oliver reached toward the puppy, his hands careful, his face set in determination. The truth was clear. This was not cruelty's domain alone. Here, compassion had entered, and it carried the power to change everything. Oliver studied Rio again, noticing the scars across his wings. His expression shifted from anger to awe. "You've survived more than I can imagine," he whispered, voice breaking. Rio tilted his head, his gaze sharp yet weary. The scars glowed faintly under the shaft of sunlight, no longer just wounds but symbols of endurance. Thomas scoffed, rolling his eyes. "That bird is worthless." Oliver's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with conviction. "No," he said firmly. "He is stronger than you'll ever be." Rio's chest swelled faintly, his feathers shimmering in the dim glow. For the first time, his scars no longer felt like chains but like proof of survival. In that moment, the truth revealed itself. Rio was not broken, he was unbroken. Thomas's face twisted with fury as Oliver reached for the cages. "You think you can take them from me?" he spat, voice harsh with venom. Oliver stood firm, eyes locked on Thomas, voice steady but edged with fire. "These animals are not yours to break." Rio flapped weakly inside his cage, sensing the clash building like thunder. Luna pressed closer to him, her body trembling. Hope whimpered softly from her cage, eyes pleading for rescue. The shed was heavy with smoke, but beneath it, a storm of confrontation brewed. Thomas grabbed a rusted pipe, raising it threateningly. Oliver stepped forward, fists clenched, refusing to yield. Rio's screech split the silence, his cry defiant, fueling the moment. The stage was set for a battle not of fists, but of survival and dignity. Thomas swung the pipe down hard, striking the cage, sparks flying as metal clanged. Rio shrieked, wings spreading in panic, feathers scattering like ash in a storm. Oliver lunged, blocking Thomas with his body, eyes blazing with fury. "Enough!" he roared, voice echoing like thunder through the shed. Luna darted back, her small form trembling, while Hope whimpered louder, pressing into her cage corners. Thomas sneered, pressing forward, but Oliver refused to give ground. Rio's eyes locked on Oliver, seeing for the first time a human who would stand against cruelty. The clash filled the air with violence and defiance, every second trembling with danger. The toxic haze thickened, choking the room, but the fire of hope burned brighter than the fumes. Oliver shoved Thomas back, his fists trembling with rage. "You've tortured them long enough," he declared, voice raw with passion. Thomas stumbled but steadied, snarling, "They're mine to do with as I please." His words dripped poison, but Oliver stood taller, shaking his head. "They are not property. They are lives." Rio screeched again, his wings rattling the bars in agreement, Luna pressing against him for courage. Hope's whimpers turned to faint barks, as if joining the defiance. The shed felt alive with resistance, the air vibrating with cries of survival. Thomas raised the pipe again, veins bulging with fury. Oliver braced himself, ready for the storm. The confrontation had reached its breaking point, a test of cruelty against compassion. From the corner, a soft sound broke through the chaos. A low, steady growl. An older stray dog limped into view, his fur-grayed eyes sharp with wisdom. Max, the elder, had lived in these walls too long, watching silently. Now, he stepped forward, his body weary yet unbroken. His growl deepened, filling the shed with warning. Thomas turned, startled by the sudden presence. Oliver glanced at Max, awe softening his hardened expression. Rio watched closely, his eyes widening with reverence. Max's presence was more than defiance. It was guidance, a reminder that survival was possible, even after endless cruelty. His stance was not of fear, but of leadership. In that moment, the fight shifted, the animals no longer victims but united spirits. The shed erupted with raw energy, animals and man united against cruelty. Thomas swung his pipe once more, but Oliver caught his arm, twisting it until the weapon clattered to the floor. Max barked sharply, advancing with fierce growls, his presence unshakable. Rio screeched, wings spreading wide, his voice piercing with defiance. Luna pressed against the bars, eyes blazing with courage. Hope barked louder, no longer just fear but a cry of strength. Thomas stumbled back, rage fading into fear as the room turned against him. Oliver stood tall, chest heaving, his voice unyielding. It ends now. The air shimmered with triumph, every scar, every cry converging into one powerful moment. The animals had endured, and now, together, they had broken cruelty's hold. The shed door swung wide, sunlight flooding the space as Oliver led the animals out one by one. Rio blinked against the brilliance, feathers catching golden light, eyes wide with disbelief. Luna clung close to him, tiny body trembling, but no longer from fear. Hope stumbled, weak legs quivering, yet her tail wagged faintly as she sniffed fresh air. Max limped beside Oliver, head high, his presence steady and proud. For the first time, Rio felt the toxic stench fade, replaced with crisp wind carrying life. His chest swelled, his wings stretching slightly in freedom's breath. Oliver's voice was soft, filled with reverence. "You're safe now." The outside world seemed endless, full of possibilities. The past still clung like shadow, but freedom was here, waiting to be embraced. The group emerged into open fields, the grass swaying gently under the morning breeze. Rio perched on Oliver's shoulder, his claws digging in with uncertainty, but his gaze sharp with awe. Luna trotted nearby, her steps tentative yet curious, ears flicking at every sound. Hope stumbled at first, then bounded clumsily, her joy unrestrained despite weakness. Max walked proudly at Oliver's side, his gait slow but full of dignity. Rio inhaled deeply, his chest swelling with scents of grass and fresh earth. He spread his wings wider, trembling but determined. The world beyond the shed was larger than memory, brighter than his imagination. Oliver looked at them all, a faint smile crossing his face. "You've made it," he whispered, his voice steady with hope. Oliver knelt in the grass, setting food gently before them. Luna sniffed cautiously before nibbling, her eyes brightening. Hope wagged her tail eagerly, devouring every morsel with newfound hunger. Max ate slowly, savoring each bite, as though honoring survival itself. Rio hesitated, feathers puffed, his eyes wary of the offering. Oliver held out a piece gently, waiting with patience. "It's yours," he said softly, no command, only kindness. Rio tilted his head, then inched closer, beak touching the food. His chest tightened as he took it, tasting not just nourishment, but trust. For the first time, his body relaxed, feathers settling. The moment was small, yet monumental. A bond had begun, fragile, but real. Rio's spirit, once caged, took its first step toward healing. As the animals ate, the field filled with sound, birds singing, wind carrying gentle whispers of life. Hope rolled clumsily in the grass, tail wagging, her playful bark ringing like music. Luna chased after her, paws light, eyes shining with joy. Max lay down in the shade, his body tired but his gaze calm, watching over them like a sentinel. Rio tilted his head, eyes softening as he observed them. For the first time, laughter, not cruelty, echoed in his world. Oliver sat quietly, watching with a smile, his heart full. "This is how it should be," he murmured, words carried on the breeze. Rio spread his wings slightly, not to flee, but to feel. Freedom was no longer dream, it was here, alive. Later, Rio perched on a wooden post at the field's edge, gazing upward at the open sky. His wings twitched, feathers trembling with the memory of flight. Oliver stood nearby, hands resting on his knees, watching silently. "You'll fly again," he said softly, more hope than certainty. Rio's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon where clouds drifted lazily. The scars along his wings burned faintly, a reminder of pain endured. Yet his chest swelled, his spirit yearning not just for air, but for freedom. Luna curled near his feet, purring softly, while Hope rested close by, her head on Max's paw. For the first time in so long, Rio was not alone. His fight had not ended, but his healing had begun. The sun began its descent, bathing the sanctuary fields in a soft orange glow. Oliver guided the animals into their new home, a safe haven filled with open air and care. Rio clung to his perch, eyes scanning the horizon as if still testing whether freedom was real. Luna leapt gracefully through tall grass, her small form alive with curiosity. Hope barked joyfully, stumbling as she tried to chase butterflies. Max settled into the shade, his gaze calm, his duty now complete. Oliver smiled faintly, his voice warm but soft. "You're home now," he whispered. The sanctuary was quiet yet alive, filled with whispers of peace. For Rio, the day no longer felt like survival. It felt like the beginning of something new. Rio shifted on his perch, wings spreading slowly, feathers glowing in the soft light. His scars caught the sun, no longer marks of pain but of strength. Oliver watched with steady eyes, awe in his expression. "You're stronger than all of us," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. Luna sat near Rio's post, her tail flicking with ease. Hope rolled in the grass, carefree, her barks echoing like laughter. Max raised his head, ears twitching as he kept silent watch. The sanctuary hummed with peace, every life given a second chance. Rio tilted his head skyward, the call of freedom stirring within. The moment was not about cages anymore. It was about wings waiting to rise. Oliver sat on the ground, legs crossed, his gaze on Rio. "You've carried so much, yet here you stand," he said softly. Rio turned his head, his eyes locking with Oliver's, fierce but trusting. Luna patted closer, curling in Oliver's lap, her purr rumbling faintly. Hope leaned against his side, tail wagging, her body warm with gratitude. Max lay nearby, his eyes half closed, content in quiet peace. Rio lifted his wings again, testing strength, feathers catching the light. The air felt alive, every sound echoing harmony instead of pain. Oliver's eyes filled with tears, but his smile never wavered. "You've given us hope," he whispered. In that moment, the bond between man and animals was sealed in silence, stronger than words. The sanctuary grew quiet as the sun lowered, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and violet. Rio perched higher, watching as Luna curled near Max. Hope dozed against Oliver, and the world softened. His eyes scanned the horizon, fierce yet calm, as if marking the land as his own. The scars on his wings no longer spoke of pain, they sang of endurance. He shifted, wings stretching wide against the glowing sky. Oliver looked up at him, pride shining in his eyes. The silence was not emptiness, it was peace. Rio inhaled deeply, his chest rising as though preparing for something greater. In the quiet, he felt whole, as if the sky itself had been waiting just for him. Night settled, the sky darkening as stars flickered awake. Rio stood tall on his perch, silhouetted against the last glimmer of sunset. His scars shimmered faintly, no longer chains but emblems of survival. Oliver whispered, "You're free," his voice carried by the night air. Luna stirred in her sleep, Hope whimpered softly in dreams, and Max sighed peacefully. Rio spread his wings, chest swelling with strength. He did not fly, not yet, but the sky was waiting. His gaze pierced the horizon, fierce and proud. For the first time, the silence was not suffering, it was peace. The story of cruelty had ended, the story of resilience had begun. And in that stillness, Rio became more than a survivor, he became a symbol of unbroken spirit.